Give me a pocket.
Yeah.
Maybe without your phone, close it.
Hey.
How are you?
Good. You?
Very good. Good to see you.
Nice to see you. Finally.
Finally.
Super.
Olá, tudo bem?
Shall we
Ouvi dizer, mas pronto, conseguiram chegar cá.
You tell me where.
Então é assim. E agora?
Yes.
Então não perderam nada importante.
Não é muito fica feio atrás, não?
I didn't wear a tie because I didn't know. It's
You don't need it, only I need it.
it's
Sim.
informal.
I'm formal enough for the three of us.
Ok. Então vamos.
These headsets are among the worst that I've ever worn.
Mas vou pôr neste caso.
They are
Yeah.
extremely uncomfortable with glasses.
Yes,
Queria só-
exactly.
eu
You're
tenho
right.
aqui
You know,
And you cannot rotate your head, but okay.
é uma boa
We'll
pergunta, vou
survive.
verificar.
We'll survive.
Não, mas
So, good afternoon, and thank you so much for your patience. Dear participants, it is a pleasure to welcome you all to this Transform4Europe Alliance Science Café at Universidade Católica Portuguesa here in Porto Campus. The Science Café aims to promote the dialogue among academy and the public in general, conducting in a café mood, nice and fruitful exchange of ideas and experiences. This Science Café involves 2 universities from the Alliance of 10, as well as a very important institution in our country. Our guests will share knowledge and point of views from Italy, Trieste University, and Portugal, Universidade Católica Portuguesa, on the topic of innovation and impact in industry, which takes place within the Innovation Day 2025 from our Faculty of Biotechnology. So I have the pleasure of welcoming the moderator of this session, Professor Ricardo Simões, Head of Innovation from the Norte Portugal Regional Coordination and Development Commission, CCDR, and for us, our Italian guest, the full Professor of Innovation, Management and Entrepreneurship at the Department of Economics from University of Trieste, Professor Guido Bortoluzzi, and the Prorector for our Innovation and Entrepreneurship from our university, Universidade Católica Portuguesa, Professor Céline Abecasis-Moedas. Thank you so much for being here, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this event, to this discussion, and a special hello to my colleagues here, Céline, Guido. Thank you very much for accepting to discuss this important topic. On behalf of the North Region Coordination for Development, it is always a pleasure to host or to be present in any event that discusses innovation, that discusses research, but especially that discusses the important part of tech transfer, of making research transfer into value in companies. And so it is indeed in this scope and in this framework that we'll have the opportunity here to push forth and backward some topics on this. So innovation is a word that has been a little bit abused over the last few years, a little bit like sustainability. So it is everything and nothing in particular. Everything that is done, usually people associate with innovation. But what is this innovation? Well, I'd just like to mention that having thought a little bit about this, I disagree with the concept of innovation that was pushed forward by Nicholson, creator of the 3M and the Post-its, that innovation was making money out of research. So research was making of turning money into knowledge, and innovation, according to him, was then turning that knowledge into money. And so I think that nowadays innovation is not just making money out of knowledge. It is all the process of creating value to the society. Value which is much beyond purely financial aspect, although it is an important part of society and economy. So in that context, and in the context of the differences between the academic world and the corporate world, we could start this discussion first in terms of, in these stakeholders, and after years of bringing together the different sides, the academia and companies, putting them work together. Céline, if I can ask you first, what is still missing? Why can we not link these two sides more efficiently still today?
Right. So first, good afternoon. Can you hear me? Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here and to celebrate the 40th anniversary of the Biotech School of Católica. It's a great honor to participate. So what is the issue? One of the issues is that the two worlds, academia and the corporate world, function with very different metrics. So what matters in one world is very different from what matters in another world. So typically, companies, what drives companies is essentially the money and the profit, whereas for research, what matters is the number of publications and the impact of the publication, which might not be related to the economic impact of those publications, for instance. So typically, the universities are full of people with great knowledge, but this knowledge is not always transferred to the corporate world. So that's one of the main issues. Given that I represent the academic world here, I have to defend it a little bit, because typically companies tend to blame it all on us. And I want to say that it is, I think it's a bit unfair, and let me explain you why. One of the, I was saying that the metrics are very different. One of the metrics that is quite different between the corporate world and the academic world is the time. So the corporate world has a very short timing, short perspective. The corporate world wants quarterly results. The academic world has a much longer perspective. So normally, companies blame it on us that your perspective is so long, it takes you so long to give any results. We don't have the patience. The truth is, in the big scheme of things, we are now aware that this short-term perspective is not necessarily positive for society overall, and that having a long-term approach, like universities and academia do, might be a nice alternative. So in a way, the difficulty is to reconcile the financial and impact, and to reconcile the short term and the long term. And this is where we're having difficulties, and I think we have to look at the other, bridge the two worlds on both sides. So I think the effort is needed on both sides. So we have to come closer to the corporate world, but I want to see more people of the corporate world in the universities.
Absolutely. And I think we've made huge progress in 20 years.
We have, yeah.
20 years ago, you would not find a faculty professor that was willing to talk with a company or even to go after projects with companies. Nowadays, the reality is completely different. The metrics have also adapted a little bit, but we still have ways to go, I think. Guido, and considering this and considering especially the scope of entrepreneurship and the support of startups and all that, how can university play a central role in this ecosystem that we could say is a triple or even a quadruple helix?
Well, complicated. Let me say first that my answer will be very short because I agree 110% with Céline. So probably I don't have much to add. Let me just add this, if I can follow up on your interesting answer. I've been working with companies in applied research projects for 25 years, okay? I became full professor last year. Why did I become full professor? Because I do many things, because I work a lot with companies, I bring value, I bring money, I bring projects. No, of course for publications, okay? So this is, I don't have really a great passion for research, meaning that I love research, but if I wake up like this morning at 4 a.m. and I'm unable to sleep, I don't write papers at 4 a.m. No? Maybe I check my emails, I look for interesting projects, interesting stuff, I read news, but I don't do research at 4 a.m. But actually, this part of my CV means actually nothing, meaning that it's totally useless to progress in the career. And that's a big issue, because that, of course, if my KPI are totally different from the company KPI, we have a problem of, alignment of KPIs. And so, of course, I need to bring home, let's say, the bread for my family, and so I need to follow my KPIs. So what my colleagues say, oh, Guido, you are really good because you collaborate now with so many firms. Thank you a lot for that. Pat. That's it. So in exchange, actually, I have nothing more than the pat in the shoulder, no? So it's, and that's really, really crazy. Going back to your question, but also to the definition. Coming from business, let me say that I tend to agree with the CEO of 3M, meaning that I teach innovation management. The first slide of my course is the definition of innovation. That is the successful exploitation of new ideas. Of course, successful doesn't mean just profits creation. It can be value creation for the firm also, not only for, let's say, for the market, for the stakeholders. Nowadays, companies, I think that they could need more us, because we are going towards an era where companies need to be extremely agile, but also ambidextrous. The last publication, the last book, let's say I published with Springer, was actually about strategic agility. What is strategic agility? Strategic agility is the ability of a company that maximizes the returns of the current business, so what they are doing right now, but with one eye, but at the same time, with the other eye, is looking into the future, potential futures, because you don't know what will happen. So the issue is preparing the company from a strategic point of view, organizational point of view, for being ready for any kind of future, whatever it might happen. So that means looking in the short term, and this is something that probably in the academia we cannot help much companies, but at the same time looking in the long term, at the big trends, and especially at the early signals of change. No, because nowadays you see business models that emerge everywhere, no, and it is becoming faster and faster. No, you cannot just be reactive in this area. You need to be proactive, and to be proactive, you need organizational routines and you need strategies. And in doing that, I think that we can help, because we have the time to reflect on how to prepare companies to look into potential futures. Not just one future, but many potential futures.
Absolutely. And in that scope, because recently companies have also evolved the profile they're looking for in terms of human resources, and we know that human resources are more and more a crucial part of the companies and how they operate and how competitive they can be. This issue of the flexibility, adaptation, is this something that from the curricular point of view has been looked at enough, or do we need to pay more attention to that, giving students transversal skills, more capability to adapt to a changing world, a world in which we wake up each day and maybe there are new international tariffs that completely change the landscape?
Absolutely. So, one of the things, actually one of the trends that I am currently studying as a researcher is the trend of longevity, which let me tell you about quickly what I'm talking about. So in the last 50 years, we have gained about 30 years of life expectancy, which is something pretty amazing in one generation. So every generation in the last 50 years, we live 25 years more than the prior generation. So this is a huge, major change. At the same time as this is happening, the birth rates are lower and lower. Italy and Portugal are some of the lowest in Europe and very close to the lowest in the world. I mean, the lowest in Europe, I think the lowest in the world is Korea, with 0.8 babies per woman, which is very, very, very low, which means that basically every 10 years the population goes down by about 30%. So it's a major trend. So in Portugal and Italy, I think it's around 1.3, 1.4, which is quite dramatic. So when you put those two things together, what is happening is that the number of young people is going down very significantly, and the number of older people, whichever definition you want to use, 55 plus, 60 plus, 65 plus, whichever definition you want to take, is going up. So this is a major trend that companies are not seeing. So you were talking about helping companies to envision and to anticipate longer trends. This is a very obvious trend that is happening, in front of our eyes, but most companies don't even have a strategy for that. Meaning they have no HR strategy for how they're going to manage differently, meaning there won't be enough young people to hire in the future, and the future is starting tomorrow. And there will be more and more 55 plus or 65 plus who will have to work longer for a range of reasons, including the fact that they want to work more, and because probably financially they will have to work more. So this is a major trend, long-term trend, that companies are not anticipating. And actually, the few things that are discussed in the corporate world are very negative when I consider that it is actually a very, very positive trend. Two main reasons. One is what that means is that there's more and more consumers who are 55 or 65 plus. Today in the rich world, about 50% of consumers are 50 plus. Only 5% of marketing budgets are allocated to that segment, which is nothing, basically. And not only it's 50% of the population, but they have a much higher purchasing power than the 50 minus. So that means it's a huge market opportunity, but again, very few companies anticipate it. The second part, which is the workforce part, is that this will create very strong and very interesting perspectives for a multi-generation workforce. So in the very near future, you will have people, the term that is used is 5-generation workforce. So you will have people at least of 10 years differences, which is a major difference. What that means also is that the older people will have even more than before a mentoring role to have towards the younger generation. And probably there will be mentoring on both sides, because we are aware that probably on the digital part, the younger generation is more digital savvy than the oldest one, which is not necessarily true, but anyway. So just to say, this is a huge opportunity, long-term perspective, that companies are not anticipating, when actually if you look at the data, I mean, even if tomorrow everybody started having twice as many children as they have today, which is never going to happen, it will take about 30 years for things to change. So this is happening.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, the European Commission knows this is a big problem for Europe, especially when Europe is trying to commit itself to being a leader in innovation and becoming more competitive, recovering from a couple of decades losing that competitiveness, and we'll only be able to do it if we have the human resources.
Absolutely. Let me just add one thing related to innovation, which I think is quite interesting. So there's a research paper that was published recently about the age of patenting. So, as expected, people tend to patent more when they're young than when they're older. Actually, the peak is about at the age of 38.
Already passed.
But no, hold on, I have good news for you.
Ah, okay.
So the good news is, after the age of 38, the number of patents per researcher goes down. But what is very interesting is that when you have multi-generation teams of older and younger people, they perform better than the average of their age. So our future, I'm also past 38, our future is working with younger people and helping them to take advantage of our experience and past and experience.
So glad we are still useful, actually.
We are.
Always, always. And so, Guido, if you don't mind me asking you, because the scope of this event is very much also on the tech transfer, how does education play a role in that, and how are we preparing the youngsters to do that tech transfer?
Actually, I don't know if we prepare, our students to do that. For me, it's easier. I teach entrepreneurship, business modeling, so I have in class, startups. I'm also, let's say, scientific coordinator of a lab that is called Contamination Lab. Nothing with virus. It's actually cross-contamination labs, actually. So the name, it's a little bit unfortunate, but let's say it's like that. So I would say for me, it's natural, I see that for colleagues of mine, it's a little bit difficult, especially for the ones that are very research, let's say, oriented. And sometimes they don't see even the value in doing that. And that's a pity. That's a pity because there is a lot that we could do in order, let's say, to put, let's say, companies more and more in contact with our students. Because every time that happens, companies, they are super happy of doing that. When they participate to the initiatives that we organize, we put them in contact with students, they are always happy because they hear, let's say, fresh ideas. To be honest, the quality of the ideas is not very, very high, but that's normal because, in order to produce an idea that is technically and market viable, you need also years of experience, as we just said. But they are extremely happy to receive ideas that are fresh, But I see it, let's say, not so easy. Probably people like me that teach business, they should be in university more transversal. So what I'm doing, for example, in Trieste, I open my course of entrepreneurship and business modeling to all the departments. So any student of any department can participate, can enroll. And I'm also pushing colleagues of mine in chemistry, in physics, to send me their students. Because my dream is one day in 3-4 years to have a class of 200 people representing all the 10 departments in my university, and then letting them, let's say, contaminate each other and work together. But there is, let's say, a long way to do that, because not all my colleagues are really sensible, let's say, towards, let's say,
to the
issue of
that.
Yes, collaborating with companies. Many of them are still skeptical about the fact that then if I open to companies, they will steal my research, they will steal my ideas. For some of them it's really still a little bit tough. So even this to stress that even, let's say, the first change should happens here, and then all the rest is just a consequence. Yeah.
That also happens a little bit in the symbiosis between small companies, startups, and big companies. It is a concern indeed, and it is not easily fixable, even because the IP protection mechanisms that we have not always work very well. So delicate subjects. Another thing that is in the title of today is the entrepreneurship part. And so in that scope, there are huge differences, and we would spend the afternoon talking about the difference between the three large actors currently on a geopolitical terms, the United States, Europe, and the Chinese markets, or China. But there are a few very critical differences that everyone knows. One of them is obviously the diversity, and Europe has a cultural diversity, language diversity, etc. That is a plus, but on the other hand creates barriers for us. The United States don't have that problem. China doesn't have a problem with setting a long-term plan and keeping on it for 20 years. But there are other very different different things, like, for example, access to venture capital. And venture capital, investment, etc., is critical for the ecosystem of entrepreneurship. But a different thing also, very clear between the United States, for example, and Europe, is the willingness to fail, the willingness to try and fail. And so I would ask you, do we train our next generation, the students that are very well represented here, do we train them enough? And how are we going to change the culture in Europe that we will try and be willing to fail a series of times and keep trying to build a company and keep failing time after time, not giving up and being accepted by the society, which in the United States is perfectly like that, but here is not like that. So, Céline, maybe you can start, and Guido then.
Sure. So before I answer that, if you don't mind, I just want to build up on what Guido just said, and again, I could not agree more. I think now it's about maybe 120%. I'm a recent pro-rector for innovation and entrepreneurship, and one of my objective is to create an entrepreneurship course that will be transversal to 16 different units. So
Wow.
you and I will keep in touch, and let's see if we can achieve it.
I can come,
No, exactly.
a couple of times per year.
And you can do it on your 10 with the 10 units, and I can do it with the 16 units here. So this is a shared ambition, and I think this is what should happen. And let me tell you the first step that we have done in that direction. We have to. I'm a believer in baby steps. So until about 6 months ago at Católica in the business school in Lisbon, we had an entrepreneurship a pre-acceleration program, which is for students who took an entrepreneurship course. Often they are not ready to be really accelerated. So we created a pre-acceleration program, which is a 6 weeks weekends program, which is open to all students. But it was open to all students from the business school. We ran it for 4 years. It was very successful. We have between 6 and 10 teams every year. Mm-hmm. Very, very interesting. We had a jury with VCs and everything. Anyway, I become pro-rector, and I'm like, we have to include all the units of the university. So we were able to open it for the very first time, and I'm, very, very proud to say that on Saturday, so a few days from today, we will have the first the final of the program, where we had 20 teams, of which 12 teams of the business school, 3 teams of the School of Biotechnology, 3 teams of the Human Sciences faculty, 1 from nursing, and 1 from the medical school. So 20 teams with a lot of different perspectives, so from different schools. The truth is that at the moment, each team is from one school, and it's composed of people from the same faculty, and they're working on their project separately. My ambition for the future is to have people mix them up from different faculties. But, baby steps, so, one step at a time. But
I forced them in class, yes. I make the groups, so I forced them. So this is...
They apply with their own idea.
Yeah,
and
they put also at least an Erasmus student in each team, so they have to speak in English. That's it. Full stop.
A good one, yes. Yeah. So now, just going back to the failure. So, like Guido, I'm an innovation and entrepreneurship professor, and one of my area of research and teaching is design and design thinking. And in design thinking, there's a saying in design thinking which is fail early to succeed sooner, or even fail often to succeed sooner. And the whole methodology of design thinking is about creating small steps, failing at them, learning, and getting ready for the next one. And the point is that the earlier you fail, and the more you fail at the beginning, the more likely you are to be successful later, which I think is a great way to teach students and to show students how failure is not failure, or how failure is positive, because it's a way to get there faster and better. So I'm a big fan of this quote, and I use it a lot, is fail early to succeed sooner.
Makes perfect sense. Guido, your opinion on this?
The opinion is that you can't teach what you don't practice. So if you are not used, let's say, to fail and to accept failure as, let's say, a way for learning, is complicated to teach it. One of the principles, in this case of agile thinking, that is very similar actually to the principle of design thinking, is think as a gambler. Meaning that when you invest in innovation, think as a gambler. That means, what is the maximum amount that you can lose if you go to the casino? The money you have in your pockets. That's the maximum amount. This is the maximum affordable loss principle. That is, bet a lot on many projects. Some of them, they will find, let's say, you will bring them to the second step. 90% you will abandon them. But out of the 10, probably you will have a couple of them that are promising. No? So invest less, but and more in more projects. Diversify more. On the one hand. On the other hand, I have to bring here also the experience of a big multinational company that probably you all know, that is Luxottica. I personally know the R&D manager because we were friends when we were kids, let's say. And in Luxottica, actually, they take a different approach. They look in the very long term, they anticipate many trends. And when I asked to my friend, you know, how much do you invest in percentage of the per turnover? He replied, we don't use percentages, no? Meaning that if it is necessary to invest in a technology, for example, as you can imagine, smart glasses, sky is the only limit. So I go directly to the CEO and say, I need this amount of money in order to go in this direction. And then we discuss, of course, but there is no discussion, okay? So actually, I would say, even in this case, companies need to exert a little bit of ambidexterity, okay? So on the one hand, betting less and diversifying more in order to reduce the risk and increase their possibilities to remain competitive in the long term. On the other hand, especially big companies, the ones that really set the direction to, let's say, create the path for all the others, and that requires huge investments. And of course, venture capital here can help in the case of smaller companies.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we could also start discussing the role of governments and the role of the EU in supporting those developments, because there is a public side to development that is expected and positive. But trying to keep on track, before we open the floor to discussions, I would ask if both of you could name one flagship case, an example of a collaboration between university and companies that you would highlight from your ecosystems. Maybe you could start,
I start
Guido.
first. I mentioned it also this morning in the podcast we recorded. Download the podcast because we want to become famous. So download the podcast and listen it many times, okay? In your Spotify, you know, in the playlist. So, this morning, you know, I wasn't able to sleep. I woke up at 5, and so I said, okay, let's give a look at the ocean, no? And at 6, there was a big cruise ship arriving. And you told me that actually you have more and more arriving here in Porto. And of course, with the cruise ship, there was also, let's say, black smoke over the ship, no? And that's an issue, because when the cruise ship arrives in the port, the cruise ship keeps the engines on because they need to produce energy. And you have a city that is a floating city that needs a lot of energy, and it needs a lot of fuel. And this fuel is diesel in the 90% of cases. Well, in the University of Trieste, in the last, let's say, 5-6 years, even more probably, we started even more, we collaborated with the #1 in the world in the production of cruise ships, that is Fincantieri. Fincantieri is an Italian company, and actually they are the most important, let's say, supplier. So they build the whole ship, and MSC, Viking, and all the others, they are clients, of course, of the company. We worked a lot on using hydrogen instead of diesel, no? And what is the problem of hydrogen? A lot, many problems, because hydrogen is not really easy, let's say, to use, to store. You know, it's a little bit dangerous. It also needs a lot of space. You know, you cannot really compress it really well, no? But at the end, we succeeded. After working years with Fincantieri, we developed, let's say, technologies that helped the company a lot. in building the first cruise ship that is fully based on hydrogen. It is now built by Fincantieri for Viking. It will be delivered in 2026, and Viking has already pre-ordered 2 additional cruise ships, 100% hydrogen. I would say this is a good example of collaboration between university, between a big multinational company. There was also an important role by policymakers here, but I think that is, let's say, a flagship project for our university.
Okay, thank you. Céline, do you want to highlight one of many cases that UCP has?
Of course, yeah, sure. So let me tell you, this is actually it's a really cool story. So it's this technology called Gluma. I'm not sure if some of you are familiar with it. So Gluma is the story of, so I have here the name of the student. So Francisco Nogueira, who was a student at here at the Faculty of Biotechnology, and Frederico Stock, who took a master in business at the business school. In 2020 or 2021, one of their family members got diagnosed with breast cancer, and they thought that, you know, there's so many women being diagnosed and dying of breast cancer, and prevention could be so much better if there was more technology in it. So they started working on a glove that has sensors in it that allows to better diagnose breast cancer. So what is interesting is that they were part of the very first forward, you know, the pre-acceleration program that I mentioned earlier. In 2021, actually they won. So the award, it was 3,000 euros. So they won 3,000 euros, which is, you know, very first step. As it happens, a year later, I was part of the jury for the Altis Innovation Award, and they won as well, 25,000 euros. Mm-hmm. So you see, you know, the story piles up. About 2 years later, I'm a board member at COUF, the hospital group, and I'm the chair of the innovation committee. And there's a whole innovation group at COUF that of which the mission is to partner with startup so that the startup can try their product or services in hospitals. So it was one of the startups that was tested in hospital. Actually, they pivoted from a B2C business model to a B2B business model, and therefore, you know, partnering with COUF was very important. Long story short, you know, between 2021 and 2025, so in 4 years, now they have raised almost $1 million. There are, you know, the product is already on the market. And it has, you know, when you think about it, it has started as a really small, so it started between biotech and business at Católica. It started with a real small project with a small award of 3,000 euros, which seems like almost like a joke, but you know, it's not, because it's with that they got encouraged and they believed that they could go to the next step, and 25,000 and 50,000 and 100K and 500K. So this is an amazing story that puts together the university, multiple departments. I love the story. Then an established company, COUF, and now you know, it's a startup which exists on the market, and the whole ecosystem has worked quite well. So it's a really nice story.
Wonderful, wonderful. It's amazing how sometimes this snowball, a cascading effect,
Absolutely.
When you have good work and you believe in you have good convictions and you believe your work, it can continue multiplying like that. I'm looking at Deborah. High expectations, right? It's easy to raise the bar. no pressure
at all.
But it is also, I think, that natural for us, and it is expected that we have this expectation of the next generation, the people we train, because we know that they can succeed, and sometimes doesn't go perfect, but definitely many opportunities. So I think that we have time, and I think it would be interesting to have a couple of questions from the audience if you want to participate. So I open the floor. If anyone wants to ask a question, I would prefer yours than the rest of mine. So, please, don't be shy.
We have prizes for the first question, so no, right? So.
Free coffee.
A souvenir from Trieste.
Ah, that's
This is a very informal. This is a very informal conversation. So please, any issue that you've been struggling with, questions you have. Not yet. We need to still warm up the public a little bit more. Then I'll go into a controversial question, taking advantage of the few minutes. Maybe somebody still wants to ask one. Do we have enough public policy instruments to fund this shift from R&D, tech transfer, and entrepreneurship? We certainly have some. Is it enough? Is it a problem? Or we have many other problems and this is not the focal point? What do you think?
Ricardo, do we have too many? So meaning that I'm challenging you.
It is an excellent question.
Too many, because it's also a matter of efficiency in using the resources. No, so sometimes when you have too many, not concentrated, and too vague, meaning that the output required from project, they are not so specific. You don't even encourage, let's say, the collaboration, in my opinion. Of course, for base research, it's okay, but for applied research, personally, I believe more in the role of incentives than on policies, so especially fiscal incentives to, let's say, nudge a little bit and to force the collaboration between firms and universities. For example, in Italy, we had for some years, let's say, fiscal incentive to companies to finance scholarship for PhDs. It was fantastic. You know, we had an increase in the number of scholarships that was significant. So I would say, why not? It worked. Why suspend the policy? So I would say, for basic research, probably it's okay, but I see that I personally participate in many research projects, several at the European level, and I must confess that the ones where we brought home really useful, let's say, outcomes were a part of them, not all of them. Not all of them.
I have to say, I personally have noticed how in the last couple of years, maybe half a dozen years, the number of calls that open require full-time attention. I mean, you dedicate your time just following all the mechanisms of funding that is available.
It becomes a job.
Indeed. No. But indeed, there has been a shift in trend from grants more into loans and things like that, which goes in part into what you are suggesting.
And that's another issue. Yes,
absolutely.
That's another issue.
Céline.
Just a bit on Guido's points. Two things. One is today when a researcher receives money from a patent, he is taxed very highly. So we are creating negative incentive for researchers to patent when, you know, it was the aim of the whole discussion. We want people to patent more. Another thing that was discussed, I was at a COTEC conference yesterday afternoon and this morning, and one of the measures that FCT is announcing is to have more PhD grants or grants for PhDs that are done in companies. And I think it goes very much into the direction of what we've just discussed. Actually, so I'm French. I did my PhD in France, and at the time there's a framework. To be honest, I'm not sure if it still exists, where you could do an applied PhD in a company funded by a company, and that was quite successful at the time. I did one of those. My research was funded by France Télécom, the telecom operator. And we were, at the time, we were a bunch of PhDs, each one of us working on digitalization. So I'm talking about 25 years ago, so not yesterday, in different industries. And you know, I thought it's a great initiative. We did, depending on us, but you know, I've been doing research that is still published, but the fact that I was working closely with the corporate world, I think has been very important for me in bridging the corporate world and the academic world, which I think is one of the important missions that I have as a professor, as a researcher, and as a prorector.
Absolutely. Well, as mentioned, I'm picky on keeping time, so I think that we need to wrap up. But there is time for one question from the audience.
For your debate. It was very interesting to hear your thoughts. And you were talking about this dichotomy between university and academia, not academia and industry, and people from university going to academia. And maybe you talk about some reluctance. Well, we don't see it so much, but One thing that we from the academia might not be doing right, the academia and those that do the public policies, let's say, is allowing corporate or industry to go into university, say for even for teaching, because especially for younger people, we have so strict rules, and as people that have in charge the higher education, we should fight into that, because in fact the participation of professionals from the industry is very restricted from the law. It is not a question, it's just a thought, because I think we should be more strong in trying to introduce new ways of having more beneficial interaction. We have also, I think, a strong responsibility for that.
Absolutely. Guido, comments?
I'm personally a fan of applied university. I see them in the German system. I don't know if they exist also here, where, you know, professors, they are hired after staying a certain period, let's say, in companies. And then maybe they do the PhD, then they go work for companies for 10 years, 15 years, and then they come back to university. That's fantastic. That's a really, really nice system, and in Italy doesn't work much. I had also a former colleague of mine at MIB Business School, because I work also for a business school. She went working for Honeywell in Italy, then she moved to the US, and then she applied for Harvard for a PhD, okay? I don't remember where, but then she applied for Harvard Business Schools. Zero publication when she applied, as she was hired. She was hired because of her potential, and because also of the experience that she earned in staying in Honeywell for 10 years. If we believe that this is the right model, let's go, I would say, no?
Absolutely.
With courage. Let's be brave a little bit.
Well, we've run out of time. We could spend, I think, the entire afternoon discussing these important topics. I'd like to praise the School of Biotechnology for organizing this event and thank Universidade Católica Portuguesa for keeping up with these different mechanisms of fostering discussion, fostering pondering how can we make this system more efficient, and especially here in the scope of the European University that promoted this discussion today. Thank you, Céline, thank you, Guido, for the very interesting opinions and positions. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we'll keep on with our program and maybe switching to Portuguese, as we've decided. Vamos agora dar lugar a um momento muito especial, que é a apresentação de pitches da nossa universidade, ou de convidados da nossa universidade. E por isso peço ao professor Eduardo Cardoso que assuma.
Então, para a sessão que segue, nós temos então uma proposta de apresentações que nos vão procurar convencer do mérito e do potencial de projetos que estão em curso. Muito obrigado. E queria para o primeiro projeto, que é da Viviana, que será apresentado pela Viviana, que se está a preparar, que é um projeto que procura valorizar a pele de coelho para aplicações em saúde, aplicações em substitutos de pele humana. Vamos ver